Hey, everybody, welcome to the Grow Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Kevin McNulty, and this is your personal development school of growth, where each week my guests and I will bring and break down big ideas and practices that will help you learn, grow, and succeed in life. Thanks for checking us out. Now let the growth begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Grow Yourself. Listen, folks, I got to be honest with you that it's not every day that I come across what I would consider true heroes. That is individuals who really have dedicated their lives to others and to their country. And today I say very sincerely, today is a very special podcast episode. I have the privilege of sharing with you a story that is of one truly remarkable person. I came to know Lee many years ago at a speakers convention, and then I had the pleasure, of course, of reading one of his many books, I should say, and but then also had the privilege of speaking to him personally and learning a little bit more about him. And again, I say this in earnest. I just was truly inspired by his journey, and I can promise you this: you will also. This person who has not only excelled in so many ways, but as I said, has also displayed really immense courage, resilience in the face of, frankly, for most of us, just unimaginable adversity. And so let me just share a little bit more about who he is. As president of Leading with Honor, a leadership and team development training coaching company, Lee Ellis, that is Colonel Lee Ellis, coaches with Fortune 500 senior executives in the areas of hiring, team building, human performance, and succession planning. And I know he also talks about so many other things that help us grow as human beings, as professional beings, as spiritual beings, and we're going to learn a lot more about that. His media appearances, by the way, include interviews on such networks as CNN, CBS This Morning, C-SPAN, ABC World News, and the Fox News Channel. And early in his career, Lee served as a U.S. Air Force pilot, and so he is therefore, as most of you all know, I'm a retired Air Force person, and so I consider him a brother and a comrade. But he was an Air Force pilot, flying 53 combat missions over North Vietnam. And then in 1967, he was shot down and held as a POW for more than 5 years in Hanoi and surrounding camps. So for his wartime service, he, of course, was awarded 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star with Valor device, the Purple Heart, and the POW Medal. Lee then resumed his Air Force career, serving in a variety of leadership roles, increasing responsibility, including commanding a flying squadron, and in organizations, displaying leadership and leadership development before retiring from the Air Force as a colonel. And then it only starts there again. As a retired Air Force colonel, his latest best-selling book entitled "Captured by Love: Inspiring True Romance Stories," inspiring true romance stories from Vietnam POWs. But listen, this is only one of not 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, but 7 books, including an amazing book that I read many years ago called "Leading with Honor: Leadership Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton." You can learn a lot more about Lee, and we'll share these links later on and in the show notes, but you can just go to leadingwithhonor.com. And so if you would, ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome my friend, my comrade, my spiritual brother, Colonel Lee Ellis. Colonel, I got to salute you. That's the way it works, doesn't it? God bless you. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Great to be with you. We both have a good background of wearing blue and sometimes being in the blue skies. And we both faced a lot of things over our career, but, we're both blessed to be here, aren't we?
We are very, very both blessed to be here. Lee, I'm curious about so many different things about your life, but I really want to start, as I often do, just ask, who is Lee Ellis? Where did your life start, and just kind of bring us up to this place. And I have a ton of questions to ask, but I want folks to know who you are as a person.
Yeah. I grew up in North Georgia, kind of the red hills. It's not the real hills, but it was red and a little bit hilly between Athens and Commerce, Georgia. The University of Georgia was 10 miles away. And of course, my mother's brother had played football there in the late 20s, and his two sons had played in the 50s. So I've been watching Georgia football games all my life.
Wow.
I thought I was going to be the quarterback. When I graduated from high school, I was going to go there and be the quarterback, but I only weighed 155 pounds. I didn't have long hands, fingers to throw passes with, and I wasn't the fastest guy on the team. But I knew what I wanted to do, the number two thing. Growing up on that farm, one time when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents took me to the Veterans Park in Athens, Georgia, and there was a World War II fighter plane there.
Oh
My
my.
dad picked me up and set me up on the wing, and I went over and got around the fuselage and the canopy and looked around, and I thought, this is me. This is what I'm going to do. And
Wow.
from then on, and I played a lot of sports, like football, baseball, basketball, ran track, all those kind of things. But the thing I really wanted to do someday was to fly airplanes. So when I got to the University of Georgia, and by the way, I grew up in a unique era.
Hmm.
In the 1950s, I was plowing mules. Even in the early 60s, I graduated from high school in 61. But 5 years later, I was flying supersonic jets. So I went from plowing mules. What a unique era in history to go from plowing mules to flying supersonic
I
jets.
mean, I haven't read all of your books, but is one of them From Mules to Jets or something? I mean,
That'd be a good. That would be a good title. But I have a couple of pictures that I use sometimes when I'm speaking because I want to make sure people know, younger people know what a mule is. It looks
yes.
like a horse. But I always enjoyed being outside. I was always good at being adventurous. I was. My mom was a school teacher, and I always had a good ability to take risk, but not too far. And
Hmm.
when you're a fighter pilot, you have to take risk every day, but you have to know where the edge is, and you have to know that when you go past that edge, you're at great risk, and you better be able to handle it. And so that really helped me be both confident and situationally aware that it fit in well with doing that. So I wanted to fly, and I'm a good risk taker and have a lot of confidence in my ability. I started driving cars and trucks when I was 11 on that farm. I was still plowing mules, but I was driving cars and big trucks and tractors and all that. So I was always into stuff, learning how to do it and believing that I could do it, and I usually could. So that gave me the confidence. Now, I will tell you that I was probably the worst student that ever graduated from the University of Georgia in 4 years because I didn't study much. But I passed enough to get through in 4 years. And I was a distinguished graduate of Air Force ROTC because that was really what my interest was. So
Wow.
now, later, in a time in my life, there were some things that helped me learn to be more studious and to do my homework. Always do my homework, but I didn't in high school and college.
That's interesting, though. I'm hearing you loud and clear.
So I had a good home, my good parents. We grew up going to church every Sunday. Um, I knew that God had a plan for me, and I felt like I knew what it was, and that I was going to work hard to go do it. And sometimes I crossed over the line when I was a little wild, but fighter pilots can get that way sometimes.
Yes, I know that.
Always treating people properly
Sure.
and trying to do my duty and live with integrity and honesty.
I'm just thinking about this, and it seems to me that folks who grow up in in farm scenarios, I guess I'm trying to think about scenarios where there's a little bit more extraordinary work. There are natural laws and lessons that you work with. And I was just listening to what you said about stepping to the edge, and I think that's a phenomenal statement. That did that literally, was that one of the principles that you worked towards? And that is that you understood that there's an edge somewhere, and that, if I may add this, that you would never know your potential until you pushed it to the edge to see what you're made of, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think so. And in flying, in air combat type flying, you're over the edge of where most people would be comfortable.
Well, fair
Okay,
enough. Yeah.
but you got to believe that I'm in control and I'm doing this right, and I'm situationally aware of all the things, and I've been trained well of all the things that are happening, and I'm still in control. But I know that if I go one step more, then something may happen. Now, there's a time when you have to take that risk and go one or two steps more and go past that boundary, uh, because in order to accomplish the mission or to get yourself out of a mess, you may have to do that. But you know that you're in the danger zone, and you know you better be accountable for it.
Lee, and I'm gonna jump ahead just a little here. I want to get us back on track, but I just want to follow you on this principle and this idea that you're talking about, because I think when we talk about grow yourself, this is a really interesting and important principle about going to the edge. So how do you, if I could shape this question right, how do you guide, or how do you tell or explain to, let's say, younger people, or just, or whatever, it doesn't matter, sort of the idea of how you push yourself to the edge? How do you tell people to do that? I don't know if the question makes any sense.
Well, I think you've got to know where the edge is.
Well,
I think that was
there you
part
go.
of one of the things that we learned is where is the edge, and when you get over it, how many G's can you pull? Okay, what happens when you pull too many G's?
Yeah.
What happens when you go to negative G's? Uh, what happens to your airplane when you do that? And sometimes you might have to do that, but you call them and say, hey, like one time I was taking off on Saturday. I was a young major, I think, and I had the duty on Saturday to take any people go cross country in a T-38 on Saturday, and if somebody broke down, they at some other base, they would need some parts to get their airplane fixed, and so we always had somebody on duty to take parts out on Saturday. And so on Saturday and Sunday. So when I got alerted, hey, get in here and got to take some parts down, 2 bases in Florida, 2 airplanes were down. And okay, so I got in there and I did my pre-flight, strapped in, took off, taxied out, took off, and I got to 155 knots. That's about 175 miles an hour. And I pulled the nose stick to pull the nose up, and it wouldn't come up. And the stick wouldn't go back any further.
Oh,
well,
that's not good.
I knew I had to abort. And so I aborted, and I was able to stop just before I got to the end of the runway. But I had stood on those brakes. I just pushed the button and called the tower and said, Moody Tower, Jake 1-2 here. You better call the fire department and tell them I'll meet them out in the cool down zone. Because I knew that those brakes were going to turn red hot and might even explode and blow up and catch the airplane on fire.
Because you're still full of fuel, right? Yeah.
And so I called them and told them, and they sent them out there, and I pulled over in the safe zone and where they could come in, and they checked it out. And I got out and went and got another airplane and took off and carried the stuff down there. But here's the thing.
That's incredible.
When we found out, the problem was that the crew chief had tied down the equipment in the back seat because it's empty. I'm in the front seat, the pilot. It's a 2-seat airplane. And he had tied down the back seat and turned the seat that you sit on, which also has a parachute in it, upside down. And when he turned it or flipped it around, and the back seat in the T-38 has a notch in it so the stick can come back.
My goodness gracious.
That notch in there. Well, he turned it around, and that no notch there on that stick.
Got it. Yeah.
So I guess you could say it was a little bit my fault for not really checking him.
Yeah.
Well, he was connecting it all up, and I looked, and it was all connected, and I didn't examine that seat.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it was what it was.
No, no, absolutely. That's a fascinating story, and I guess as I again as I sort of think about this, going to the edge, because I don't say these words necessarily, but even when I'm on a completely different scenario, when I'm teaching middle school players how to play tennis, I'm talking to them about a similar concept of going out on the court to play a match and maybe being as aggressive as they can, but without, to your point, without, I tell them it's controlled aggression. You're
Ah,
pushing the limits, but at the same time, I'm not saying go get crazy,
right,
go wild, swing as hard as you can.
right.
But how hard can you swing? And then I think about those in other contexts, Lee, like maybe, talking to your boss. You have to stand up to a
What I
boss who,
was thinking about, talking to your boss. You
yeah.
got to know where the edge is and when to go over it, or talking to your people.
Mm-hmm.
When one of the hardest things for me is I'm pretty comfortable talking to my boss because what's he going to do? Fire me? I've been a POW. I don't care.
Yeah, right. There you
But
go.
talking to your people that work with you or somebody in your family is you
Mm-hmm.
got to think it through about where is the edge for this person and where is the edge for this person. And I don't want to get much over the edge because uh, after that, they won't be listening. They'll be feeling emotionally
Right.
against me or I'm attacking them or something. So you got to figure out how I can do that so it doesn't feel like I'm pushing them over the edge.
Wow,
Oh,
it's
you
such a
know?
great principle really to learn by.
Uh,
And here we're learning from not just a pilot, but a POW. So before we get into that though, because you know, of course our audience, like maybe the millions of people who have listened to you already tell this story, is just going to be fascinated. But I'd like to explore. So you joined the Air Force. What year did you go in? And
65.
you went in the Air Force in 65?
Yep. And I went in and I got commissioned on July the 24th. And 3 days later, I signed in at Moody the 27th. Okay. And started flight school on August 6th, 53 or 54 weeks later. I graduated and got my wings. And the assignment said, this is August 6th of 1966, a year later, an assignment for over half the guys in my class at all 8 training bases. Okay, so there were several hundred of them. Over half of them, their assignment said F4 pipeline, Southeast Asia,
Oh,
which as quick as we could get combat qualified in the F4, we were going to war.
wow. Well, I was going to ask you about your experience of flying before going to war, but those two things seem to coincide. But I would be interested to know just a little bit about the experience of flying an F4, just generally speaking, what that's
Yeah.
like. How do you tell a
Well,
civilian this?
yeah, it was a very powerful 2 J79 engines, burned a good bit of fuel, but it had a lot of power.
Mhm.
And now, as a fighter, it was designed originally to be a long range interceptor for the Navy.
Oh
It
my, because
wasn't
it's a big
designed to be,
plane, right? Yeah,
wasn't designed to be a bomber or attack airplane.
I see.
And it really even not an air to air combat. It was go out and intercept those bombers that were coming after the ships
Yeah,
and shoot them down. But the Air Force and Marine Corps and the Navy all made it into a fighter type airplane.
yeah,
So it had a lot of power, so it could work well vertically, like if you got in a dogfight, but it wasn't a turn as well as the MiGs.
yeah.
Some of the older airplanes we had, it wouldn't turn as fast as they would. So if we're in a dogfight, we worked vertically because we had more power than they did,
Oh,
and
very interesting.
fight that way. But it was a great airplane, and it had two pilots. Well, in the Navy and Marine Corps, they had a naval flight officer, Wizzo, in the back seat,
Yeah.
weapons support officer. But in the Air Force, they were going to outsmart the DoD and get more pilots. And so what they did was the Air Force said, "We'll put pilots in the back seat." And
Interesting.
so all the guys that were coming out of UPT going to go to fighter had to go to the back seat for a year or two and then upgrade to the front seat. So I went to the back seat. Now, some of the guys that were flying in the front seat were guys that had never flown fighters before, and they'd been flying tankers and
Mhm.
cargos and B-52s, and they
Yeah.
were. I was more equipped and helped them become a fighter pilot, even though because I'd flown the T-38, which is a fighter type airplane.
Right. 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 Right.
So anyway, but they were in charge and control and
Sure.
command. So
So
it
then
worked, but I was ready to get in the front seat.
I bet you were. Yeah. I mean, as all good fighter pilots would want to do that.
Mhm.
So then, Colonel, in 7 November 1967, was a game changer for you, wasn't it? To put
Yeah.
it lightly. Tell us about that. Set that up for us, if you would.
Well, I was on my 53rd combat mission. I had about 15 more missions over North Vietnam. I had
Mhm.
about 15 other over South Vietnam and Laos. Laos interdiction missions, dropping bombs on the roads and that sort of thing. And in the northern part of South Vietnam, we flew close air support to help the Marines and Army infantry on the ground. When they got attacked, we'd come in and bomb the people, strafe and bomb the people attacking them to help them out. So that was close air support. So had some of both of those, but most of my missions were bombing over North Vietnam, bombing the roads, bombing trucks, bombing the bridges, that sort of thing. Anything to stop them from hauling stuff into the South.
Mm-hmm.
And we normally took off in for those bombing runs, we took off in two ships. Now, if you're going on a combat air patrol where you're protecting the bombers up around Hanoi, uh, and MiGs were out and lots of other stuff, then you flew in four ships. And usually there'd be four ships. So it'd be 16 airplanes
Oh,
in either bombing or 16 airplanes protecting the bombers. So it was exciting. We got shot at most every mission. I got bullet holes in my airplane several times. But that particular day, the airplane just blew up into several pieces and started flipping. And as quick as it got positive G's and I could flip, which was in a second or two, and I could eject, I pulled the handle and ejected. And my partner in the airplane did too. We both ejected safely. And, we're 3,000 feet maybe. And there's just all sorts of anti-aircraft artillery and soldiers on the ground shooting up at our wingman and maybe at us. I could see the bullets going by, the tracers going by. But I didn't worry about that. I just worried about trying to do my parachute landing, fall, and escape before they can capture me. But they surrounded me and captured me within 90 seconds.
oh, wow.
Took 2 weeks to get to Hanoi, and the only way that the thing that really helped me was the guy in charge of taking me north was a wonderful soldier. He was tough, but he was a good man, and he had orders to bring us in alive. And because of his character, he wouldn't allow people to beat us up. And
This was a North Viet. This is your captor.
yes, our captor.
Wow.
And the crazy thing, I don't want to go into this now, but I really admired him. And because of a typhoon and some bombing and floods and bombing that had blown out the road and washed out the road, we had to wait 3 days to go north toward Hanoi. And he was in charge of taking me north. And so he took me to his home, which they had moved out of their home, and they lived in a bomb shelter, like a cave right near sand. And there were sand dunes near the Gulf of Tonkin, and that's where they lived, was right down below those. And they had dug in there and had this cave in the sand dune. And I stayed with them for 3 days and nights. And a guy from Dong Hoi, who knows some Air Force pilots that have been back over there, that's where close to where I was captured, have gone in and they talked to their guy, and he went and interviewed to find the guy that was responsible for taking me north. And he died in 2015 and talked to his wife, and she told him about me coming to their house. Isn't that amazing? This was a year and a half ago.
That's
So,
incredible.
and they treated me like I was a guest almost, except my hands were tied and my feet were tied at night, so I couldn't jump up and run around.
I mean, how do you make sense of that? I mean, you talk about cognitive dissonance. I mean, just but if I may just, and I don't want to take you off your flow here, but you know, may I ask, Lee, when you landed with your parachute and they're coming at you, can you even recall what was in your head at the time,
Yeah,
what you were
yeah.
thinking?
Oh, yeah.
I'm interested to know that. I mean, what were you trying to? This may sound crazy, but were
I
you trying
wish
to
I could
problem
read the first.
solve?
I wish I could read the first page in the first chapter, but I talk about that because I did my parachute landing fall, and I got my radio out, an emergency radio, and I called the wingman. I said, "Hey, I'm 200 meters north of the river. Start strafing at 300. I'm headed south to the river." Then I put it down and I disconnected my parachute. And I was down in an old bomb crater, and I was about to jump out and run to the river. And all of a sudden, they surrounded me and captured me. I mean, it happened that quick. And so I went from being totally focused on what I was doing. Oh, no, let me back up. They started popping out. About four of them popped out behind these bushes there,
Oh wow.
and they had their AK-47
Yeah.
rifles. This,
uh,
and I thought, well, they told us that the people capturing you are the least know how to do that.
mm,
That's the best time to escape when you first get captured. I hadn't been captured yet, but I pulled out my 38 revolver and I motioned for these guys to get away. And they didn't move. And I fired around the tracer over their head, and they should have shot me, and they didn't. They just went, and one of them pulled out a little pointy talkie. It was a little piece of paper that had, on one side, it had Vietnamese, on the other side, had English and phonetics. And he's looking at it, and he said, hands up, surrender, no die, surrender, no die. And I thought, he's probably right.
yeah. You
So,
know.
and so I put my hands up and they captured me.
Yeah. I mean,
Crazy.
yeah. You
So
have
I
it.
was really focused
Okay.
on getting away until they captured me. And then I went into the shock and just, you know.
Yeah. And and was there a point that you can recall that you came sort of maybe out of that shock to the point where you're starting to think about, again, problem solving, or, what do I do now, or just trying to think through this?
Yeah, I did right away, but it was like, my thinking was, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what's going to happen next.
Could you?
And that's when I just said, Lord, you're in control. I'm not. And I'm just going to do my best to do my duty. And if I have a chance to escape, I'll escape. And if I don't, I won't. And I'll just hang in here.
Is it? I don't know. I mean, it's, I guess, especially, it's a, I wouldn't say it's strictly a Southern term, but, we often use the term, we're blessed. And
Yeah.
did you feel that way once you realized that your
Yeah.
captor might have been one
Actually,
of the nicest guys?
knowing that I was able to eject out of the airplane and not get badly injured, and my lip was cut
Yeah.
bad. I had another cut under here.
Yeah.
I had a cut back here, and then that the next morning when I woke up, I could not raise my head up more than about right there because it had been so stretched and injured by the 18 G's going out of the ejection.
18 G's?
Yes, 18 G's going up the ejection ramp.
But didn't you say that the
The
plane?
old, the old ones, but see, it had a canister in there that blew up
I
and
see.
exploded. The new ones had a more of a rocket that was
I
spread out
see.
over time, over a second, whereas an initial one, boom,
Yeah.
just blew you out.
And didn't you say that the jet was kind of flipping as well? So I mean,
Yes, it was.
how did you decide when to hit eject? You
Oh,
just
I knew it was totally going to crash. It was totally out of
Yeah,
control. That we had no control over it. It
I
wasn't even
see.
an airplane anymore.
Yeah,
All it was a
yeah,
big old canopy
I
toppling
see.
through space.
I see. So yeah,
The
so there was
everything.
not like even a decision to be made. Yeah, I see.
No,
Yeah.
no. But we had lost two F4s, and all four members, pilots in it, were killed when I was at George Air Force Base going through my F4 training. They were a class behind me, and within 6 weeks, two F-4s went down, and the pilot stayed in it and got killed. And our wing commander called all the pilots to the officers club, and he went on a rant and screamed and yelled,
Yeah.
"You've got to know when to get out." And he
Yeah.
was right. And
Yeah.
I thought, I won't ever have to worry. I'll know when to
Yeah.
get out.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, there's the lesson. And so, okay, so and I know we have limited time here, and I want to get on to your next book, but your current book. So you're with this family, I guess, and at this point you already realized that this was a decent man that you're dealing with, despite him being your enemy. So maybe just take us from there, and then about what took place in Hanoi Hilton.
Yeah, I stopped in Vin. They had a holding pen there, basically, and joined up with two other guys. We spent about 3 days in Vin, and then we went on to Hanoi. And by the way, we were strafed and bombed twice, but they didn't strafe and bomb us, but we were close to where they were on the way up there. So we heard all that going on. We got to Hanoi 2 weeks later, and are put in a cell. The four of us in there are put in the same cell, 6.5 by 7 foot cell. So, that's about the size of a small bathroom in a gas station in the South. So, and we lived in there 24 hours a day for the next 8 months. And we started having some interrogations, but it was right before Christmas, and there were lots of people captured in the fall of '67. They had so many guys there, and we had fewer interrogations than most people, and they weren't that serious yet. But after Christmas and the New Year, and after Tet, they started getting tough, wanting us to fill out forms of biographies, answer questions about the military and all this kind of stuff. And that's when we went through torture. We all went through torture. And so we learned then that they could make you do something and they wouldn't let you die. And eventually you're going to have to give them something, but you gave as little as possible. I filled out a 3-page biography, and the only thing that was true on there was my father's first and last name. Everything else was a lie. But when I did that, I was so ashamed that I wasn't tough enough not to give them anything, that I laid there and cried, and that was the most worthless I've ever felt. And then a few hours later, I got back in my cell, and one guy's already been back. He didn't last as long as I did. And then another one, our guy that became our cell leader, he was tougher than me. He was a New York State wrestling champion. He left hours after I did. And then we learned that eventually we learned that everybody up there had been tortured and done something, but gave them as little as possible and bounced back. And that was our whole plan.
Lee, how do you manage that in your mind? I mean, I'm just trying to think through this, that there's probably a fairly wide spectrum of people there with personalities and belief systems and ethics and all these other sorts of things that we know about. But how do you just, as a man, decide to be a great patriot, if you will? A great man
in anything you're doing, whether it's marriage or being a POW or being a leader in any corporation, commitment is so important. Mm-hmm. And we were committed to our mission. We were committed. We had all memorized the 6 articles of the code of conduct, the military code of conduct. Came about after the Korean War, when a lot of them collaborated with the enemy. Mm-hmm. And it basically says you'll be loyal to your country, collaborate with your allies, and you'll be faithful to your teammates. Basically, that's what it says. Mm-hmm. And so we were committed to that. And so that was our goal. And sometimes we weren't as strong as we'd like to be. They could make you do something. And the goal was to give them something that ain't worth nothing.
Very interesting.
Because it's still a battle. It's still a battle. We're not giving up.
Mm. Wow. So, Lee, how do you express this idea? And I wouldn't suggest to you, of course, that people in corporate America or private citizens don't have integrity and these levels of character. But that's a whole different level there of character development. And how do you talk to people about how they create this inside of their organization, or, you know, be it private, you know, business, or, you know, could be any type of an organization?
Yeah, I think you have to clarify it. You know, you can't just assume that everybody thinks this way.
Very
And one of the most important things as a leader, you have to clarify the boundaries of your organization. We're really struggling with that in today's culture. There's no boundaries in Washington, D.C., hardly at all for our leaders up there. But think about at home, children growing up. Think about driving on the interstate from here into Atlanta, or from Atlanta to Birmingham. The speed limit is 65 miles an hour. Most people are driving 70 to 75, but there's a group of people that are weaving in and out going 85 and 90.
Yeah,
because they have not been held accountable to boundaries, and nobody's held accountable right now. And so you have to clarify those boundaries and expectations for your culture, and let people know that when they get over the boundaries, something bad is going to happen. You're going to hold them accountable, and they got to be responsible. So that's what is so needed, is responsibility and accountability for people to follow. And now we understood that very well back then. This was, we grew up in the 50s, and I came on active duty in 65. So all the leaders, the senior leaders, the colonels and all, had been in World War II in Korea. So they, it was pretty much clear boundaries. So I think you've got to really make it clear. But at the same time, you have to show people you care for them.
So Lee, I mean, you've already kind of gotten into it a little bit, but I do want to ask you sort of the general question about what were the early days at the Hanoi Hilton like?
Yeah, that was, we had no idea what to expect. It had taken me 2 weeks to get there. And then I went through an interrogation with 3 other guys, and they're the 3 that rode the truck up from Bend to Hanoi. We'd been together for several days. And then we had this office manager, you might say, the camp officer, who had worked hard to memorize a lot of American idioms. And we sit on these low stools now. They're higher, so they have to look down at us. We have to look up at them. See, and he's sitting there with the.
And that was intentional, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, to make them superior or whatever. Okay, got it.
Right,
got it. Yeah.
exactly. So we have to be looking up to them. And so he had a camp turnkey on either side, guys that had the keys and kind of ran the show in each block, and guards behind us with their AK-47s. And he sits down and he goes like this. And now the fat is in the fire. And of course, I'm sitting there, my first night at a POW camp, actually first day at a POW camp, and this guy says this, and I just want to break out laughing.
Say that again one more time.
And now the fat is in the fire.
The fact is in the fire.
That's an old saying, from the South. That means you're in trouble.
You're in trouble. Okay.
The fat is in the fire. It's going to burn,
Okay, the fat is in the fire. Got it. Oh, yeah.
You're going to be sizzling here ahead in the days ahead. And so it was scary, but at the same time, I just almost broke out laughing in his face, And anyway, so that was my introduction, the first English words in the Hanoi Hilton. But he went on to tell us we had to follow the camp rules. So they were posted in every cell on the door, inside of the door of every cell there, which basically said that we couldn't communicate with anybody. We had to do everything they told us to do, always obey them, that kind of thing.
Were they particularly you talked about, of course, the one man that brought you up there, and he had a conscience, obviously. Yep. And I don't know how many, say, Vietnamese that you interacted with, but were they, what was their typical demeanor towards you and your comrades?
The people in the camps were generally, the turnkeys had to be people kind of neutral.
I see.
They would tell us what to do and kind of mumble some broken English.
Yeah.
They didn't, they kind of frown at you sometimes, but they didn't try to harass us. Okay. Their job was to open the door, let us go out to bathe if we went out that day to bathe, let us go out to empty the bucket. Now we're in a 6.5 by 7 foot cell.
Jeez.
Okay, 6.5 feet is 6 inches wider than my arm spread, and 7 feet's a foot deeper. And there's 4 guys in this cell for the next 8 months. We went after that meeting with had the turnkey take us to our cell. And the turnkeys really opened the doors and let you come out twice a day to get your food. We got served a meal in the morning about 10 o'clock and about 4:30 in the afternoon, pretty close together. That way it fit their schedule. And we had basically 6 months of watery pumpkin soup, 3 months of cabbage soup, and 3 months of what we call sewer green soups, which are like chopped up lily pads. The good thing was it was boiled, and that killed the germs. The bad thing, there was sometimes some bugs and worms floating in it at different times of the year. It depends on what was hatching out.
Yeah.
Sometimes there'd be a pig's eye in there, or, you never knew what was going to be in there. But, and then in addition to that, there was a cup of rice or a small baguette of French bread. That baguette of French bread was really our protein.
Yeah, I get that. So Lee, what were the one or two or whatever the most challenging aspects for you personally?
Well, the fact that I had 3 cellmates and I wasn't by myself was a real plus.
Yeah.
The fact that we were alone and isolated, our cell walls did not touch any other walls. That's how isolated that part of the Hanoi Hilton was that I was in. So that was a little bit concerning. But I think the thing that bothered me the most was when I was pulled out for interrogation. They wanted me to fill out they brought a 3-page biography for us all to fill out in our cell. And so the 3 of us, we put down, one guy put some stuff in, the other 3 of us just put name, rank, service number, date of birth. And that was it.
I know that pissed off.
Then a few days later, they called us in and said, "You didn't fill it out. You must do it now." And I said, "I'm not going to do it." And we were by ourselves then. And they pulled us all out at that day and said, "Not going to do it." And so they brought the torturers in. They put us in handcuffs and leg irons and put us on. They really wasn't the real torturers, but it was going to be humane torture. So they put us on our knees on the concrete slab floor, and we had to we were in handcuffs, but we had to put our arms over our head on the wall. So after a few hours, I sat back down, and they came in and grabbed me and started kicking me and hitting me and put me back up on my knee, pulled me back up on my knees. So I went a few more hours, and same thing happened again. And then the third time I went a few more hours, and same thing happened again. And finally I decided, I can't beat them at this. Somewhere in there, I've got to do something different.
Yeah.
So I decided I would fill in the 3-page biography, and I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And I did. They took the handcuffs off, and I did. And I was in leg irons too at that time. I filled in the 3-page biography, but the only thing I put on there that was true was my father's first and last name, hoping someday I'd write a letter home to my parents. Wow. Or get one. So everything else was a lie. And so finally they sent me back they put me back in the handcuffs and left me there for 2 or 3 hours. And I'll tell you, I was the worst feeling I've ever had. I cried like a baby. I felt like I was the most worthless person that had ever worn a uniform because I couldn't beat them.
I see. Very interesting.
And then I get back, and
that's not the fighter pilot's mentality, for sure.
That's right. I get back to my cell, and one guy's already back, and then the other guy, the toughest guy in the room, who was the New York State wrestling champion, he lasted a good bit longer than me, but he came back later, and we all had done the same thing. And then when we finally got communications in the hall there a little bit, we found out that everybody had been through the same thing and done the same thing. They could make you do something, not necessarily what they wanted,
right?
In something on these kinds of things, and they wouldn't let you die because you were a good hospital, so they were going to take you to the point of where you would suffering and sacrificing.
This may be a bit of an odd question, but when you were around, I say particularly your torturers, but just maybe more general speaking, did you look at your captors in the eye and did you, what did you see? It's an odd question, but I'm just curious, particularly those that might have been torturing you. Did
Yeah.
you just see evil people, or what did you see?
The real torture guys, the ones I had weren't the real torture guys
Okay.
at that point. The real torture guys were psychologically sick,
Oh,
psychopathic. They were in terrible. They would just laugh, and I wouldn't even go into the details, but it was
no conscience.
beyond what you can write.
Okay.
They were psychologically, mentally ill, sick people. But the people that were running the show, generally day to day, were really more doing their job.
Yeah.
There were
Yeah.
soldiers doing their job,
Yeah. Yeah.
just like we were dropping bombs, killing people.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. No, I get that. I do. I get that. So, Lee, you talk about in your book about Viktor Frankl. He wrote the great book Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
It's a powerful book that some may or may not recognize. I recommend it at pretty much every speaking engagement,
Yeah.
any workshop I do, because, as you well know, it's about an Austrian psychologist who found himself in Auschwitz. And wow, just chills going up my spine thinking that you experienced what he wrote about. But he talks about the power of meaning and purpose in tough times. Talk about that. What helped you through all of this?
I think we believed in who we were and what we were doing. You got to
Mm,
believe in yourself. And although after experiencing that torture, I had some doubts about myself. And
I can
over the
imagine.
years, we all came to learn, living with people locked up. One cell I was in, over 50 guys for almost 2 years. And you're going to get to know them well, and they're going to get to know you. And you learn to be authentic, for one thing. Secondly, you know what your purpose is, and you're committed to it, then you're willing to suffer for it. And
Wow.
so we were committed to suffer and be willing to, that was our job, and we're going to resist the enemy to the best of our ability. And then we're going to bounce back. If they make us give in and give something, we're going to bounce right back and come back. And that's what we did. And the fact that our leaders set that example, they went through the most torture, spent the most time in solitary confinement. We had 3 senior leaders that were there 7.5 years. They got captured
Goodness
early in the
gracious.
war, in the air war, and they set such a great example for us. And they bounced back and stayed positive and believed in what we were doing. And it really created a culture that was incredible.
Yeah, and you talk about them in your book. I think
Yeah,
Risner, Jim Stockdale, who's
you're right.
well known to so many people in the Stockdale paradox, and then
Yeah,
Denton. So
yeah.
maybe just tell us a little bit about how they impacted you, or
Those 3 guys were the 3 senior ranking officers, and they supported each other if they were in the same camp. Reisner he was Air Force. He was the senior guy, and Denton and Stockdale were right behind him, pretty close together. And Stockdale was a senior Naval Academy, naval guy, not Navy. He was Naval Academy, but senior naval guy.
what rank was he at the time? I
They
know
were
he's
they were all 05, which would be a
okay.
commander in the Navy and a lieutenant colonel
Lieutenant
in the
Colonel.
Air Force. And
Okay.
they'd all been in the service, 18 to 20 years.
Okay.
And they came in right after World War II, and they were captured in 1965.
Mm,
So
goodness.
they were just hitting 20 years when they got captured there.
Yeah.
But they were incredible leaders. They were tough. They were tortured the most, spent the most time. They all spent more than 4 years in solitary confinement. Yeah,
Goodness
we had
gracious.
covert communication, so generally we would be able to get in touch with them, and they would get in touch with us, and they would tell us what was going on with them and they had suffered, but they'd bounced back, and
and
just
they were then a sense of they for you all their leadership was paramount, right, to be able to observe them
absolutely.
and how they directed you or really inspired you maybe.
They were, here's the thing about leadership. The great leaders are both confident and humble. And when
Mm,
you're humble, you can be vulnerable. And they
wow.
were very vulnerable. They talked about how they gave in, and they gave them something, but they did their best to give them something that
Gosh.
would be worthwhile.
Whew. It gave me chills to hear that. So
Yeah.
talk about a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about Admiral Stockdale and the paradox that has become very well known to many people, particularly in our circles, but well beyond that. Talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that paradox and and how it, how it played out there about optimism and these other sorts of things.
Yeah. One thing I will say about I know Jim Collins personally. I love all his books,
Yeah.
but somehow in that process of what Stockdale was saying, he used the word optimism, and Stockdale, what he meant was people who are overly positive and don't deal with the realities of the current situation. But you have to be an optimist. Optimism was the number one being staying positive was the number one factor that enabled us to hang in there and come home healthy. You have to believe, and the Stockdale paradox says that you must never forget, and you must always believe that you're going to get through this, but you have to deal with the realities of the current situation.
Yeah.
Stockdale paradox. So it's
Yeah.
kind of a picture in picture. You know,
Yes.
when TV came out with picture in
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so the reality is you got to be able to switch back and forth. And yes, you got to open up and believe that now is the time that we're going to believe that we can get through this. But at the same time, you got to deal with the suffering today.
Wow. I mean, listen, I think everybody, who's, got at least one eye open has heard of this concept about, having hope and being optimistic and also, facing reality. But this paradox that you talk about is simple but so critical to just anybody, correct? That
Yep.
on the one hand, when you're going through really, really hard times, you have to have hope and
Yep.
believe in your future, if you will.
Right.
But to your point, the paradox but at the same time, you got to have your eyes wide open and see reality for what it is.
Right.
Maybe
And you
just
may
a
have to
little bit
suffer.
more. Yeah, a little bit more.
You're going to have to suffer, and you got to be willing to suffer. Suffer.
Oh,
I
God.
mean, think of all the history of people suffering. And if you can't think of it easily, think of the POWs leaders suffering, okay, and how they bounced back. They were there 7.5 years. You know, Henry Ford has a short version of that I really like. He says, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're probably right.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. But so then how do you do that in real time? So you're suffering from whatever. How do you is it self-talk? Do you talk to yourself? Do you just keep repeating? Do you keep, you go from this and then you have to shift back to a positive mindset? How do you do that in practical terms, Lee?
You know, for me, I've said initially, I said I can go home and we'll be home in 6 months because
Mm-hmm.
President Johnson, he won't let this war keep going. He can't get reelected. He'll end it. And then he decided, announced in February, announced he wasn't going to run again. So the war lasted onward. But in the summer of 68, which is when I'd been there 6 months, I decided I could make it another year. And then the summer of 69, I said, well, I could make it 2 more years, but it was really three. But
Oh,
in
interesting.
there's the picture. I'm gonna make it out there. But day to day, you have to live day to day, and you have to deal with
Mm,
issues. And here's the thing: you have to deal with those issues, and with the courage to coach yourself to do the thing that you know is right
wow.
every day. You can't go wrong when you do your best to do what's right. You know, we have a courage uh, model that we use, and basically, you look at it and you say, "Oh yeah, yeah, I want to do all that," but I'll tell you, it's hard to do that day to day. And so, courage, we put courage in the middle now because without courage, you can't do it. There's another great book. Courage, the Backbone of Leadership by a guy
Mm,
who was on Gus Lee, and he's got this model. It shows all these things we believe over here, but then there's a river of fear. You got to
mhm.
cross it to get to the other
Yeah, you
side. And
gotta
the
cross it.
only way you can get across the river of fear is courage.
I love that. The analogy, the metaphor, if you will, of the river being of fear that there is another other side, and you have to have courage to take that jump, walk, whatever it is that you have to do.